Welcome
Hello.
to the Overprepared DM. This is Jen, and I'm here with Nick.
Hello, hello.
And our lovely guest, Sebastian.
Hello. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited.
We're excited to have you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Guys, Sebastian is creator, founder, everything, basically, of Hiadventure cast.
I mean, the players do part of it.
I mean,
they contribute.
They provide the stuff, the content.
Yeah.
The ever humble DM. The ever humble DM. Yes.
They're like the seasoning on top of the roast beef.
Mm-hmm. Well,
way to put it. It's a good way to put it. Absolutely.
I just ate, so.
I mean, we talk about food. We can. That's fine. I had Chex Mix today and a Diet Coke. Super healthy. It's fine.
Yeah, I just got back from a Father's Day dinner myself, so happy Father's Day to everybody.
Yes.
Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day. Thank you.
I mean, I don't know when I guess they'll be
next week.
To it.
You know, it's Father's Day now, and we're celebrating. We hope you had a good Father's Day, and I mean, let us know how it went. We would love to hear it. If you had. Good...
No, you all can't see me, but I am rocking a nice sunburn from my Father's Day events today. So yeah, it's a good day. Good day.
Well, here on this podcast, we just kind of talk about, you know, DM things and how we used to be stressed out, over the top, prepared DMs, and what you can do to avoid doing that, because we've done it. You don't want to, I promise. Trust, please don't do it. And we want to have guests on, and my lovely friend Sebastian agreed to be our first guest for the podcast, so that's exciting. But I want to give you the floor to kind of talk about what you do. We've hyped you up, but what do you do?
So my name is Sebastian Leverett, and I am a dungeon master, which means I do everything, all the work. No, I do Dungeons and Dragons animations, comics, kind of based on our campaign. We also have a Dungeons and Dragons podcast by the same name, Hiadventure. And we're working on some stuff for YouTube and different things like that, but mostly the D&D memes that seems to be what people gravitate towards. So lots of D&D memes coming from us.
Definitely. And your memes come from your game, right?
Yes. Yeah. I have I run 3 campaigns. And so it kind of bounces back and forth between them. So that's why there's so many different characters and stuff featured in the different comics. The podcast campaign is kind of the funniest campaign. That's the one that we record and post and stuff like that. But the whole thing started as a home campaign with just friends from college. So it's all sort of just, if you like humor, if you like spontaneous storytelling, then that's sort of what we provide in all of our different posts.
Absolutely. And I believe sorry, Nick.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna plug your Instagram where you can find all of those comics. It's just Hiadventure cast, or is it a Hiadventure? I think it's just Hiadventure now.
It's Hiadventure cast. Somebody already took Hiadventure. Darn
How
it.
rude.
I know, right?
We're knocking on their door.
Yeah, and the artwork is great, and they are hilarious. I love it. It's definitely check it out if you're listening. It's definitely good stuff.
Yeah, and
it's all like pure D&D. Anybody who's ran D&D or played D&D for any amount of time, you see something that you're like, that is a D&D moment for sure. This is great, man. It's I'm impressed. Well done.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Yeah. I mean, I guess I should thank my players, because they provide most of the material for that.
True.
Yeah, I don't think any DM goes into a campaign thinking, I'm going to make this hilarious.
Right. Yeah.
But on that note, a few things that we've talked about in our last podcast are things that we did in the past that we don't do anymore. Things that, would kill us if we kept going forward. For example, I tried to put people in every building in a city.
Oh, right.
To flesh everything out, right? So what's something that you did in your early DMing career that you definitely don't do anymore?
Oof. I used to script everything.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. When I first started, I would write down descriptions for everything, for buildings, for people. It would be 2-3 paragraphs per person, per location, per item. It was a lot of just, it was sort of, I was basically brute forcing it, you know?
Mhm.
There were still like moments of improv and stuff like that, but there was definitely, it definitely came from like a place of if I just spend more and more time on it, it'll be better, and that's rarely the case with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and I definitely am in the same boat. I mentioned in the last one that I would write a description of what will happen next based on everything that they could possibly do. And that's not how that works. I mean, it is, but you'll lose your mind.
Yes.
But
there's merit to the idea because, you know, as a player, you sit on a table, you expect the DM to have all that information prepared.
Right.
Little do they know that most DMs don't have any of it prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just a fraction of it. So what are some good like improv techniques that you've come up with to like practice that or build that skill, or does it just come with time and practice?
Ooh, are we talking about improv now? Okay.
All right. I think the biggest thing that I learned was to seriously just like listen to what your players are saying. There was a lot of, when I first started, there was a lot of like, okay, what do you say to this character or this guard to get past him?
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, you get past them, you go to the next encounter. What they were doing wasn't directing the narrative or impacting what came next. So I think the biggest skill that you can learn as a DM is to not just ask a question and then decide whether or not that answer works, but ask a question and then use that answer later down the line and really apply it to what happens next. Because it's super easy to say, you know, where do you go? Where do you guys do next? But it's harder to listen to what their answer is and then think about how that applies to what you had planned. You know, what is realistic in the narrative and how that can, you know, move the story forward in a way that is collaborative, in a way that invites everybody to really have an effect on what's happening.
Yeah, the old yes and.
Exactly.
Definitely important. I think the yes and technique, and also not having you find this quest with this specific person and this specific building that you might miss. Definitely plot points are important, and like you'll get that quest point from anybody. Just have to think it up.
Yeah.
You've played with my players before, Jen. So honestly, with what I do when it comes to improv, a lot of it isn't like plot points, where are they going to go next. That's easy for them to dig out. They're really good at finding that. They're really, really good. What's hard for me to improv are those random things that they look for that you wouldn't expect. I want to go to a weird trinket shop, or who's the ugliest person on this road, or it's just, you know, it's a horrible smorgasbord for me in my improv because I never know what's coming. But what I do is I get inspiration on all kinds of things. I go through Pinterest. I have Pinterest boards of just fantasy characters, you know, people's art, who a lot of it's just beautiful art anyway to look at.
Right.
And I'll find an interesting character and I'm like, oh, this is an interesting character. I'm going to apply this. I'm going to use this character. I'm going to, you know, I build my little backstory in my head real quick, and that's going to be the next random person that they want to talk to. That's the next person that they're going to see. Because when you're working with, you know, all of the things in my campaign, it's hard to come up with something like that on the spot. So I definitely get inspiration beforehand. And I have that tool in my toolbox waiting to be pulled out, ready to go when the time comes. And it's a matter of making that person fit into the narrative at that point.
Right.
So I see something cool that's like, oh, it's like a knight, but they want to find a weird commoner on the road. maybe it was a knight. They were a knight at one point. And now their armor's rusted, and got to make it fit their narrative. But get inspiration first. But that's really I spend probably an hour on Pinterest before every session just to find something cool. So that way, when it comes up, I have it ready, and I build my own little backstory for it.
Right. That actually reminds me a lot of like one transition that I did going from, being overprepared to being prepared just right. One part of that transition was the way I organized my notes. I used, and I think part of it is I actually do think, and maybe this is a D&D hot take, but I actually do think that the official content, the like adventures, the way that they write the adventures, it's like room 1, room 2, room 3. I think that doesn't necessarily jive with the way that D&D is actually played. I actually think that that's sort of like a limiting way of organizing an adventure path. And I think that some other games actually do have a better system for that I have taken and applied to D&D. Like a good example is Dungeon World. They have a thing called Dungeon Primers, where it's sort of like it'll have like maybe 3 NPCs, a magic item, a couple locations, an enemy boss. And it doesn't tell you, okay, well, the boss is at the end of the cave and this is the guards or these people. It kind of just is a collection of ideas that you can drop in whenever it feels appropriate to drop them in. And I think that dungeon primer, and they have a bunch of really good dungeon primers online if people just want to Google them and get ideas for how they're formatted. But I think that is a better organization tactic. It's basically what you were talking about with you have the ideas from Pinterest saved, and then you apply them when they're relevant or when it feels appropriate to bring them out, rather than, okay, well, they reached room 30. That's where this NPC is. You know what I mean? So I do think that maybe the books aren't the best organized, and that there are better ways of organizing your notes. And I think that that's actually like one resource that is really hard to find online are actual notes from a DM.
Oh my gosh.
When I first started, I spent so much time looking for ways to organize my notes, like an actual play, because I would write a bunch of notes and I'd have them all organized in like almost like an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily useful when you're playing the game. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the monster manual. You sit down and you want to play the game, so you break out the monster manual and you're looking at the monsters in ABC order, but they don't necessarily interact in ABC order. You know what I mean? Like you'll have Lich will be here, and then Zombie will be in the back of the book because of Z and L. But really, Zombie and Lich should be next to each other, organization-wise. So I do think that maybe the official content is a little bit misleading in the way that's organized. And I do think that some of the newer games like Dungeon World or Monster of the Week have a better grasp on how to organize their adventure content. And so maybe looking at other games and really learning like other systems can actually improve your Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master skills.
Totally true. Yeah. That's all. I had to look up for a second. I remember there was this dungeon generator that I used to try to look at. It's the Donjon D20 dungeon generator. And, I have never had anything but trouble with that, because it would be it does say random generator, but it was the most randomly generated possible thing based on like a theme. So before finding other more not more appropriate, but definitely more helpful tools, I used the random generator a lot, and I didn't just print it out and take it. I would spend so long on that site, like just reading what they had as descriptions and stealing them and creating my own dungeon.
Right.
But if you randomly generate one on there, 10 out of 10, it's going to be a mess. I'm sure they would have fun. It's always fun if you're just hanging out with your friends. But in terms of when things feel right, when the generator is involved, nothing feels right ever. But it's great for like ideas of what to do with doors, cursed doors, and and anything like what to fill a room with and what things like that. That was great for me starting off. I do also use a couple of the tools that you mentioned. Most of the time, comes out of my brain. How dare I be slightly creative? But I try to like plan based on the 5e rules with a lot of different. I would say I delve into a lot of like Pathfinder ideas, but not Pathfinder playstyles. And I delve a lot into like other fantasy tropes from like Lord of the Rings or I don't know, The Witcher, things like that. And it all just kind of melds together into some cohesive something at some point. But I'm done with that. So, Nick, tell us more about your thoughts.
Well, first off, anyone who's listening that's a new DM or wanting to be a DM, Donjon 5e, just Google DONGON 5e. It does have a lot of great tools when it comes to names.
True.
The cursed names, worse than the cursed door, the cursed name will get you every single time. What's this person's name? You're like, I don't know. But you don't say that, you just lie.
That's how you get names like Jimothy.
Yeah. Jimothy.
Sigh.
Yes. Yeah, no. And when you're talking about the dungeon thing, and it, like you said, it is a random dungeon. And dungeons, the games have changed so much in the past 5 to 10 years when it comes to how you build encounters in dungeons and things like that. It's all about telling a story. Where there was a time where a dungeon, and I think this is what you were speaking to here when it comes to the books that you can buy from Wizards of the Coast. They're built like the old dungeons, right? Mm-hmm. Where there's a theme to it, but it doesn't necessarily fit into the overarching theme of whatever story is being told. Few exceptions, but generally it's like it's just a dungeon. Play the dungeon,
right?
I think what it boils down to is, as a DM, even if you're playing a pre-written adventure, be creative with it, change it, make it yours. It is, you might have a player who's played this module before. You don't want them being able to just be like, cool, I know how to beat this. So change things up. And look for themes in your villains or your monsters. Like you were talking about, liches and zombies being separated by however many letters in the alphabet in the monster manual. Look at the theme of your dungeon. Look at the theme of your encounters, the theme of your overarching plot, and make it all fit. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't make sense for a phoenix to show up when you're fighting zombies suddenly, but look into the lore, or make the lore in your world, if you're homebrewing, fit that narrative, right? So if you want to have a phoenix leading a horde of zombies, I might do this now because it sounds awesome. Just make up some weird lore and run with that, and you can probably write a whole adventure based off of it. So yeah, I'm all about twisting and molding things to fit the overarching story, not just the single dungeon that you're going into at the time.
There's actually a great resource. You kind of speak about how it would be uncharacteristic of the monster in its habitat to be led by a phoenix, but there's actually a pretty cool resource. It used to be a blog. There's several books, maybe 2. That's not several. It's several. It's fine. It's called The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Yes. It was like a blog, or I have the physical copy book. And it goes fairly in-depth about how specific monsters would interact with the world around them. And it's really, really cool. So if you're like, I want to create a zombie den, That's a thing. You can go into the monsters know what they're doing and read up about zombies and how they would interact, and it has a couple things of like what they would be mixed with and what they would be, why they would be in a den. But that's a really, really good resource. I'm glad I remembered that.
Yeah, I definitely think that learning to recycle your content, and
Yes.
like I used to have a lot of pride in the fact that everything was custom made for that night. Not a single idea that I wrote down for today's session has been thought of before. I used to have like a lot of pride and ego in that. And now it's just like, hey, it worked. It worked 2 years ago. This island I designed worked 2 years ago, and my players loved it. And these new players are going to also love it because you can run it with so much confidence because you've ran it 2 or 3 times.
Oh yeah.
Having some adventures that you just know off the top of your head because you've played them already or you've already designed them and they worked, and your players love them. There is no shame in taking an adventure that you have already ran and just kind of recycling it and maybe retooling it to fit your new party or the new players. But a lot of that work, you did it. It's your work. You prepared the game, and there's no shame in taking what you did before and doing it again. And letting the players, of course, influence the new chain of events, but definitely barring locations, barring NPCs, barring enemies that you've already designed, and just kind of throwing them back at the party. There's no shame in that, and that can save so much time.
There is no
Totally
shame
agree.
in that. Yeah.
I
There's
think-
there's nobody on the face of the planet who's vying legitimately to be the best DM on the face in the world. It's impossible to do that. Every party's different. Every DM is different. Every GM in any game platform is different. So just don't stress the pride part. Like you were saying, I can see where that comes from. I really, really can. But you're at the end of the day, you're here to facilitate fun for a party, your friends, whoever it might be. Do what you know. That's totally fine, and no one is going to be like, "Oh, you're not the best DM because you recycled." No one's going to care.
Right.
And if they do, whatever.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Or even
It's cool.
as I naturally do is bring in the memes. One of the biggest things that I do in all of my games is utilize funny names for shops and stores and locations. One of the biggest things I do is Harley David and Sons, and it's a saddle / ranch / horse selling shop. There's not really a shop for selling horses, but you get what I mean. So my players at least know that is going to be in every campaign because I'm reusing the idea. I made a bar called the Rooster and Kitten, and if it kind of flies over most of people's heads, but once you grab it, you're like, that's a great name. And it's in every single one of my main campaigns. They have a Rooster and Kitten. It's a franchise. It's run by a copy of the same person. It's like a Officer Jenny.
Right.
And as long as that's like the tone of your campaign, that's totally fine. So that's more of like a softer version of reusing your ideas, as you guys are discussing. Reuse the memes. Do it. Especially if you're playing different campaigns with the same people. Or new campaigns, they don't even know that you used it before.
Exactly, right? All they know is that this is a great adventure that we're having. And you don't even have to just reuse idea, especially if you're super familiar with the players, and you guys kind of have a shared experience. Like I said, me and my players, we went to college together. And so in the podcast, I don't know if it comes out, but the school is actually based directly, the map of the school is basically the exact same map as the college we went to. So the fact that we're all so familiar with that location already from real life event, it's a fantasy version, but they know where the bookstore is. They know where the cafeteria is. They know what kind of food is available. It allows them to improv in a way that they wouldn't be able to do if they just had no idea what the space they were inhabiting is. So reusing stuff from the real world is also a really great idea. especially if you have, like I said, a shared experience or a shared location. Like, oh yeah, that place on the corner of Arroyo and Ladera Street. It's a place that you guys always eat at.
Right.
They'll, it's just like that place, and they'll immediately know, okay, well, I want to take a seat in the back where we always sit beneath the painting of Elvis Presley. You know what I mean? They can improv in a way very naturally that they wouldn't be able to do if it was just a blank canvas that they were just kind of stepping into, waiting for your initiative, your, like, okay, well, there's 3 booths against the wall over here,
Yeah.
Use stuff from the real world. If that's a resource that you have, take advantage of it. If you guys go to the same mall often and they enter a new city, okay, well, the city's, the layout, it's just like the Northridge Mall. There's 3 floors and
right.
reuse that stuff.
Definitely. I think that's probably one of the best things that someone can think about is just real world application into a fantasy setting. But then we have to think about being in our stance of holding these places online for people who are onlooking. How do we bring them into this mall? How do they sit with us underneath Elvis? And I think that's really just being descriptive enough to where the audience or whoever is watching makes a connection that this is something important to the players, and they are automatically more interested in the game, and which in turn makes the audience more interested in what's happening.
Right.
So being descriptive about things while live, I think, is definitely super important. What about some other things while live for those wanting to stream their experience?
Right. I definitely think that we do a podcast, so it's not live. Our campaign is edited.
Fair.
But I very much, it is improv, so it's live in a way. I do edit out a lot of the dead space, but I do think that one thing that a lot of new live streamers jump straight into, which I think might be a little bit of a mistake, and maybe this is, I don't think it's a controversial opinion. This is a matter of preference.
That's fair.
I think that you should always lead with comedy. I think that if you can get the audience to laugh at the characters and have fun, and before you start dropping in the drama bombs,
right,
you got to find a way to get the audience to care about the characters and stick around for that beginning section. And I think that's like a lot of really good podcasts do that. I think the Adventure Zone is a great example where they were just gags and goofs until it got serious. And by the time it got serious, you were so invested in the characters just from all the good times that you've already had. But I think leading with comedy and being aware that, you have to give the audience a reason to connect with these characters before you can make them sad. You can't just open with, well, my parents were killed and my town was burned to the ground. That can't be like your opening sentence. Because the audience hasn't connected with these characters yet. That's something that you want to bring in later. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
right?
now I'm sad.
Yeah, you definitely need to provide content up front.
Definitely. I think Southwest Gaming Society does that really well with the characters and how they interact with each other, because those girls are so comfortable with each other that there's a lot of really happy, fun, and jovial moments. At the same time, they're super comfortable with getting deep, and it's fun watching them go through the same thing. And I think Fateful Encounters is full of a bunch of people who love to make one-liners. So while it's great to lead with comedy, it's also like important to find that balance. If you're always fighting for the last laugh, then it just becomes a joke of a game. You just gotta make sure that everyone is like invested in the story over wide. But I definitely like what Bo Burnham said in his most recent special is healing the world with comedy. Super important to like just be open-minded to bringing an audience in that will eventually hear your words. Maybe.
Yeah.
And I do think that really is good. If you're streaming your D&D campaign, that starts at session 0.
Mhm.
Explain to the players, you guys put on a show. Don't have to do it for the audience, but put on a show for your friends, for your party, knowing that there's an audience watching too. And like Jen was saying, and you almost made me chirp a little bit. I'm all emotional now on this Father's Day, my 4th Father's Day. This is great.
No.
But no, they're great at that specifically. Is especially right now in this campaign. There's Phil, the wizard, who is immature. She always wants to get her way. She will fight tooth and nail against anything the rest of the party wants to do. But when it gets serious, she gets serious. Yeah. And you really have to get that out as a DM. Session 0s are so important. And explain like, hey, let your characters grow into these moments. Let them, shine. And that's up to you. That's up to the player to make that character shine. It's not to the DM. It's up to the player to make the character shine. That's really important to get across to your players, because a lot of players don't understand that. They think that the story is going to highlight them, but you can't. You got to make the players highlight their characters in those moments. So really explain that to your players, and hopefully they take that and run with it, because it's hard, but they can do it.
Right. Yeah. I do know that like a lot of, because you see people critiquing shows like Critical Role, The Adventure Zone. You see them kind of, oh well, I didn't like how they railroaded, or I don't like especially with like the more recent Adventure Zone campaign. A lot of people were like, well, I didn't like how the players didn't get enough opportunities to influence the story.
Sure.
And I do think that one thing that is so different from the playing D&D and performing D&D is the fact that so much of the collaborative aspect of the storytelling comes before the cameras turn on. Mm-hmm. Like me and my friends, we'll talk for an hour, 2 hours before we even play. And they'll tell me, I want to do this with my character. I want to do that with my character. And we'll do that, which is very different from how we handle our home games, where we just sit down and play. Because the collaborative element isn't necessarily what's happening in the game.
Yeah. A
lot of the collaboration comes in beforehand. As far as like what topics we want to cover, what setting we want to do. If they say, I'll ask them, do you guys want to do a heist? And they'll say, yeah. That might not be something that I do every time at a home game. I might just sit down and we'll go where it leads. But when we're performing D&D for the podcast, I definitely let them pick and choose sort of where the setting and where we're going before the cameras even start, so that no one's surprised or confused or sort of we all get on the same page. And I think that's part of the collaborative element that the audience misses.
Sure.
And a lot of times I think that's where a lot of those like, oh well, they're railroading in Critical Role, or they're railroading in this campaign or that campaign, or in this show and that show.
Right.
Because, and it might seem that way because the DM, Matt Mercer, for example, has already talked to that player about where they want to go that episode or that, adventure. That's already been decided. And that was the collaborative element. So it's not railroading because the player did have a say. It just wasn't on screen.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of audiences don't get to see. I think that's where some of that disconnect comes from.
Right. No, I love that you bring up the difference between playing and performing. I think that's super, super important. And there's some, I want to say specifically that having an entire episode on shopping is wonderful and fun and can have really good moments. But when you're telling a story, getting to those points is where you want to go when you're performing. But Nick, I think your campaigns go on quite a bit, right? Like,
yeah,
your last one was like 1.5 years long?
Yeah, this one that we're playing now, we are actually, oh man, I think we are over 1 year at this point.
That's a long time.
We've been playing this one, yeah.
And that's
and they're at level 8.
And that's a commitment for the audience too. So I would say Fateful Encounters really brings out like a 6 to 8 month game. So we know prior that this is where we're gonna be moving forward because it's for the show. And in person, I had games in person where we would go on side quests that would last months of game time. So we would play games, and what was the main story again? Oh, right! The world is burning! We should probably fix that now. But at least I have all of this gear that I found in all these dungeons. Like, it's just a bit different. It's a bit different between playing, which is just as fun as performing it. It's just at a different speed and pace.
You're right. Yeah, we move fast ourselves. I think we do like 8 sessions per arc, and the arc is kind of like an adventure for us. We kind of break it up into like themes.
That's cool.
But every episode we shoot for an hour and a half, and that's a big aspect of it. That time limit, or that goal of getting that 1.5 hours. Sometimes we're just like, okay, I want to see what's behind this door, but I also see that we've recorded for 3 hours. And we need to. I know this door is probably the door we should go through to progress the story. So I'm just going to do that. And so that's definitely an aspect of it, that like time management and pacing. Especially with combat, because I could do combat for 6-7 hours if I wanted to.
Yes.
But that's not necessarily fun to listen to. That was something I learned quick. After the first episode, I was like, whoa, that whole episode was just you guys fighting 3 trogs.
Right.
I gotta find a way to make that a little bit more spicy next time. So yeah, D&D, as far as pacing goes, and I think it's like written within the rules of the game, the way that the game is kind of paced out, where combat, which really represents 30 seconds, 5 rounds, 6 rounds, a minute of in-game real world time could be 8 hours, you know what I mean? Of real world time. And that's just, there's not a lot of story that can happen in a minute, logically. So you do have to keep that narrative going during the fights. It can't just be, the players are beating up a guy for 6 hours.
Right.
There has to be decisions being made and consequences and stakes established and narrative payoff, all within what would be a minute of time narratively. So it is hard.
Definitely. I totally understand. I think in person, I had like this underground vampire club, very Queen of the Damned-esque. And I don't know if you guys know who Anne Rice is, but there was at the end like this huge, many vampire fight, and we spent 2 to 3 games doing this fight. And I just think if this was live, we would have to, pick up the pace. We would have like some of them, and we would have to have like thematic descriptions of what people are doing versus just rolling dice and adding it on the page, and then rolling dice and adding it on the page, because it's definitely less engaging when you're not as descriptive with what's going on.
Right.
And that's super important. But you did mention that like you guys kind of talk prior to each game of what you want to do for that game. Do you have a session 0 before you go into any campaign? And
yes.
What does that look like?
So one of my favorite things to do for my session 0 is to play D&D, but not with the characters they're going to be playing in the campaign.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily like something that I believe every DM should do. That's just something I enjoy, and I found that my players enjoy it. Where we we meet up, we bring all of our books and papers and stuff like that, and we have our ideas. I do ask that players try to work collaboratively with their character design and their character creation, where it's not like, well, this is my wizard and this is his elaborate backstory. I try to encourage them to create relationships before the campaign starts, just because it really saves a lot of time and fixes a lot of issues with motivation and stuff like that. If one character is the brother of another character, it immediately explains why those characters stick together through thick and thin, because that's what it is. A lot of the time it's like, why would these characters stick together? And there's either no explanation or a bad one. And so having them be related, we went to school, we went to college together, or, you know, having them, that relationship be already established before the campaign even starts, does wonders for explaining why the characters are sticking together. So we do design the characters together kind of quickly, and with a caveat that once they go home, they're going to take another look at their characters and kind of finesse the numbers. And then we play like maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours, sort of like a one-shot adventure with some pre-made characters that we just download off the official website. And we establish the campaign setting. So as an example, my first D&D 5e campaign, the first time I ran 5e was a gothic horror campaign, and the players we met together, talked about our characters, and then we played a one-shot adventure through a haunted house with completely new characters that introduced the main villain. And these new characters, you know, they were only designed for the one shot, but the villain showed up, you know, they got a lot of his backstory and a lot of the mystery was established. And then in the end, they ended up running into the red mists of Sangovania. And so those characters went missing, and they showed up throughout the campaign.
That was what I was going to ask.
Once we started playing again, you know, they found a dead body of one of the characters, or they found, you know, another character, you know, they heard about another character. And so it kind of quickly establishes the stakes, the setting and the tone, in a way that's also ironically low stakes, because they're not the characters that they're going to be playing.
Right. So if they die, whatever.
Exactly. And so that is something that I've started to do. I played another zombie. I like zombie and gothic horror stuff. So I play a lot of campaigns like that. So we did another one where we created our characters, then we took out some pre-made characters, and it explained how the zombie outbreak started and how this group of characters accidentally opened an ancient tomb, releasing the contagion onto the kingdom. Yeah. And so that kind of stuff immediately helps, I think, the players understand the tone and quickly understand the backstory of what's happening, because they lived it. I think that's a really fun way of doing the session zero. But my session zeros go for like 5 hours. So obviously, if there's like time constraints and stuff like that, you got to take that into account.
Brings me
not
to
everyone can just run out one shot.
That I watch fairly often is Quest Vault. They have their session zeros as mini episodes. Basically, they do solo games with the DM to like establish them within that world, and then they'll maybe bring in another character who has had these solo games with the DM, and then they're together and they're physically playing together, and maybe let's say both of them go to an event at the same time and they get pushed into a group together, and then they had 2 games with the DM alone prior to this meeting. So it's like they've already established those characters a little bit with the DM, and now they get to meet. Or if they're relatives in some way, then they start together. I think that's a super interesting way of doing that. And I think solo games with your DM is also an underrated thing. I don't know if you've ever done a solo game with a player, but I think that's super helpful.
Yeah. So we would have, I try to run a flexible campaign. For the podcast, obviously we wait when everybody's available, and that's when we record. But for our home campaigns, we don't wait. If you can't make it that session, I'm sorry, but I got, 4 or 5 other people ready to play. And so we typically play, and then I meet up with that player maybe over Messenger or text, and we kind of run a side adventure to explain where their character was or what they were doing. And it's usually like a sort of simplified D&D. For example, instead of having like combat encounters, I just have them roll like maybe an attack roll or a spell attack roll to kind of consolidate and simplify that encounter's outcome. What we used to do was play a one shot every time someone missed, and so we'd be like, oh yeah, let's go see what these characters are doing, and that would be a whole adventure. But that of course slowed down the entire campaign, and we ended up playing one shots over and over again.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean it was a lot of fun, because the one shots were wackier, so we'd have like megazords and stuff, giant robot fights, and then we'd go back to the actual campaign. It's like, okay, well now we're fighting Dracula. But yeah, I try to accommodate the players and meet with them one-on-one if they need to. Yeah, I mean it does get to the point where it's too much work for the DM sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Trying to meet with every player's one-on-one. And I would recommend in that event that they find a system like a D&D Lite, kind of develop their own little D&D Lite system that they could play over text or messenger.
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, because that's kind of what I ended up doing out of necessity, just to get everybody's story down.
Nick, what did you do? Have you ever had any solo players, solo games or anything that like you've derived or gone off and sent them on side quests or anything like that where you've played with 1 to 2 people?
Nothing like that, at least at the table, but kind of what he was saying. I've actually texted a player before between sessions and was like, hey, you've had this vision or this dream, or this is what happened when you broke off from the group. What do you do? Mm-hmm. I actually have had many instances of that between sessions where I message a singular player and I say, if you tell somebody this, your character's going to die. But let's because this is only happening with you. But let's figure out what happened in this situation, and I have found that it's given really, really great role play moments for the players, because when whatever happens in that text thread or message thread, whatever you use, pops up in game and it's starting to come out from that one player, everyone else is like, wait, what happened? Right. So yeah, I've never sat here and rolled dice at the table, but I have actually had players I've more than once text somebody like, hey, do you have any dice with you right now? Yes. Cool. Roll a d20 in a text message. And they're just like, what is happening at this moment? And it's a lot more fun than you think it would be, because they don't expect it a lot of the time. But yeah, it's fun, and the role play that comes from that. And one of the reasons why my campaigns take so long is my characters role play a lot, which I love. But they when that singular moment comes out where like, yeah, I did this one thing with this one other NPC, or I found this item, and everyone else in the party reacts. It's one of those things where you sit back as the DM is like, yeah, I nailed that one. That was a good one. So good, yes and no. I never played 101, but yes, I have through text done that before. It's a good time. Yeah.
So I'm gonna completely shift topics, but you mentioned if you do this, like your character will be dead. So, what a threat, first off, but also...
No, this is a good transition. This is a good time to do it.
Character art is kind of something I wanted to talk about with Sebastian in general, and killing characters that have character art and a following, because you have like these characters in comics and things like that. And do you ever hesitate to have moments where there is high enough stakes that there might be death?
For the podcast, yes. there are a lot of times where it's like, oh, well, I guess you would, the monster would just attack you logically and kill you, and then that would be the end of it.
Right.
And a lot of times I don't do that, not necessarily to save the player, but just because it wouldn't necessarily be the interesting thing to do.
That's fair.
In that moment. I have written like ideas on what to do in the event of a player death. And as far as the story or the narrative goes, there's always a way to come back. Resurrection, magic. There's always a way to come back in D&D. And I do also think that death isn't always the most interesting thing to happen to a character. And I think that's something that a lot of DMs have talked about, where you could kill a character and then that's the end of the story, and then that's a great story. I think like in Critical Role, they had a character die, and I'm blanking on his name now, but
Campaign 1 or Campaign 2?
Campaign 2.
Molly Mock.
Yes, Molly Mock. Thank you. Molly Mock died, and that was one of the most interesting things to happen, not just to that character, but to the party.
Yeah.
And they took that and they ran with it and they worked it into the narrative, and it was such a huge part of the plot. The Adventure Zone also did the same thing in Amnesty, where Ned died, Ned Chicane. They killed the character, and it wasn't just the character dying. It was sort of the accumulation and the payoff of a bunch of different decisions. And I think everybody kind of knew he was going to die, just from how the story was, in the direction the story was going.
Right.
And so those deaths are significant, interesting, and should stick. I do think that there's some deaths, like, okay, you opened the trap and the trap exploded, and I guess your character died.
Right.
Those types of deaths are the deaths that I try to come back from. Yeah, I mean, it's like you have no more health, so I guess you died.
Rip.
Those are the types of deaths that I try to work with the players to bring their characters back. Maybe their character is downed and severely injured, and then they have to do a whole nother quest to fix that character in some way. So I do think like there are quality deaths and then low quality deaths. Sure. I think low quality deaths I think most DMs would kind of excuse, a stray arrow, something that was bad luck. I wouldn't necessarily recommend cheating and like, well, you rolled a 2, but I think we're going to say you rolled a 19.
Leave the impetus in the player's hands. Yes.
Right. And and always leave it up to the player, because if the player says, the character died, then the character died. There's no, you're only doing it to help the player. If you ever offer alternatives, it's to help the player, not just to fix your story. Right. But I do think that there are good deaths, and bad deaths don't need to stick in a world with magic.
That's fair. I ran our first year-long campaign with Fateful Encounters, and now it's another DM, and I'm playing in their game, and we've had conversations about fudging rolls in order to keep characters alive that we have spent hundreds of dollars on getting art. For those of you who don't know and are listening, on Wednesday nights, Fateful Encounters does VTubing, and if you know anything about VTubing, it is not cheap.
Right.
So we have these rigs for the characters, and we've spent so much time getting them perfect, and then our first game number 1, my character was like an inch from death. I was downed, second to last death saving throw, and I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do about the $300 I just spent?
Yeah.
And then I'm wondering, like, do we just make another character? And I was completely not paying attention to the game anymore because I was hesitant to die having the art prepared and made and spent money on. So I just think it's so interesting. But in a real life campaign, like where we don't have any eyes on us besides our own, I always tell my DM, if I'm not the one DMing, I always tell my DM, hey, kill me if it's interesting for the story. If you need to kill somebody, do it to me, because I'll roll with it. I don't care. But when I'm DMing, I always love having someone who says the same thing to me.
Right.
I'm like, okay, well maybe my players are getting a little high and mighty. The little B-bag or BBEG is gonna come down and kill that one specific person who said it was okay to do.
And I think that's party specific. Take some time to figure out and feel out your party. Some parties, like my players, I'm so happy that I have them. I killed my wife's character in our last campagn. That was a fun drive home. That was a fun drive home. But I had planned for this like NPC to be in the city anyway that they were in, and he was this like old ex-adventurer blacksmith, high wisdom. But they saw him before this fight started, and my wife's character died. And with my party, that whole next session afterwards, the blacksmith just like, hey, come inside, bring her with you. And he watched the whole thing happen. And it was this beautiful 3-hour session where they just sat and role played the whole time, talking about, you know, the impact of this character and talking to this old wise dude who was just, he was a dad of 7 and all of his kids are gone. All of a sudden he has 5 kids in his house, and it like my party made that happen. So I think that falls on the DM a little bit to figure out what your party can handle. And you know, streaming, not streaming, either way, some parties can't handle a character death, and that's okay. Some parties will just move on and be like, cool, new character, whatever. Yeah. Some parties would be like, this is a great moment for my character to grow and change from this. And it's all beautiful. It's all D&D. It's all ttrpgs. It's all fun. Right. So feel out your party first, and then if you want to start throwing, you know, CR20 things at them when they're level 4, you can, and it's fun.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like, and you'll figure out which players are which. I always, when you're trying to analyze your party, try to find at least the RPers, because there's 2 types of gamers, D&D players, I think, which are like the gamers who are into the, like, I move 2 feet and I take this and I shoot 6 feet, and there's like the war gamer.
Sure.
And then there is the RPer, and there's it's more of a spectrum than a binary, but people lean one way or the other most of the time. And then I think within the RPer, there's 2 types of RPers. There are the RPers that like to play a character. This is my OC. This is my character. I bring him into a bunch of campaigns. If he dies, I will die, because that is the representation of me.
Yes, absolutely.
And then there is the player, and these types of players usually make really good DMs. They just like to play characters. I'll play Wolverine this session, and I'll play Captain America this next session. They like to play a bunch of different characters, and they're typically okay if their character dies, because they already have 5 other ones planned. And so they try to find what type of players you're trying to cater to, and design your game around it. I definitely had a player who just kept dying, and it was just, and it wasn't like I was targeting him, but it was sort of like like, I'll give you an example. We played a haunted house. I really like haunted houses. I have a roaming haunted house
today, at least.
You got a thing.
Yeah. I have a roaming haunted house that appears out of the mist in different places called Abenstein House, and my players know Abenstein House, but their characters often don't know Abenstein House.
Right.
So they'll know the dramatic ironies that the players recognize the haunted house, but their characters are like, well, let's go inside. Right. I don't know what this place is. So that's always fun. But at the end of the first time we played Abenstein House, the big bad evil guy showed up. And they had just killed the headless horseman and purged the graveyard with all the paladins' ghosts. And the ghosts came down and held the big bad evil guy back, to give the players a chance to escape. The big bad evil guy was designed for level 14 players, and they were like level 4.
Yeah.
And so, all the players were like, okay, let's go. We're not ready to fight this guy. They had already been told that the only way to truly kill him was with the Sword of Suns. And so they ended up running. One player, only one player, turned and said, I attack him.
Uh-huh.
And I tell, you can do everything you can to telegraph that that's not the best idea.
Right.
But a player is going to do it just to see what happens, or just because, that's what his character would do. His character ended up dying. And I could tell from that moment on, he was definitely a player who liked to play characters until they die. And then
that's
make
fair.
a new one. And so definitely be on the lookout for signs of that. Because, once you find that player, he's going to be your best friend. You know what I mean? You can definitely
count on him.
100%.
Oh my gosh. So, throughout, like, your playing, do you, kind of, like, think about what you would make a comic of as you're playing it, or do you do that in hindsight? Do you listen and then art along the way, or do you in the moment kind of plan these like moments that you think would be great for art?
So the comics come oftentimes way after the events happen in the campaign. So I have a big list of like 100 ideas for comics right now from my backlog of stuff that's happened in past campaigns. They usually just come from like the most memorable moment, and that's whatever stuck with me to now. You know what I mean? A lot of the campaign stuff, a lot of the events happened 3 to 4 years ago now. That campaign is an older campaign now. And so I just have like the stuff that stood out to me is all I have left in my old brain. And so that's sort of what I base the jokes off of. I also remix it a little bit just to get it in that 4-panel format. There's not a lot of space
Fair.
for words. So I shorten the events. And sometimes it's a different character in the campaign that did that thing, but just to keep the comic easily readable, I like to reuse characters. Mm-hmm. And that the character that said the joke or appeared in that comic might not have actually been there in the campaign.
Right.
But I needed a barbarian, and this is the recognizable barbarian that I've drawn in past comics. And so it's sort of, the comic's like an interpretation of what happened in the campaign. And so that goes for the animations as well. I have a lot of girls at the table, but I can't do a girl voice. And so with my limited voice acting, sometimes I have to adjust the character to fit the voices that I can do for the animations.
That's cute. I love that.
Yeah.
Totally unexpected answer, honestly.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, it was really fun having you on. You have a lot of great insight and fun perspectives. That this is exactly why we wanted people on, to give us a bunch of different ways, and I think that really just shows DMs that there is not just one way to do it. That's the end of the day, is that there isn't a cut and paste code to DMing, and however you prepare is hopefully not overly prepared, but we'll find out. So again, hi, my name's Jen. You can find me at Jen is Online everywhere you can possibly think of, as I said last time, except OnlyFans. And
I am Nick. You can find me at EmoAasimar on Twitch, on Instagram and Twitter, and Southwest Gaming, SW Gaming Society on Twitch, and we stream every Wednesday night.
That's true.
And I am Sebastian Leverett, the Dungeon Master of Hiadventure. You can find us at Hiadventure Cast on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. And we don't have the podcast running right now, but we have a new chapter of the podcast coming soon. We drop them in batches now, so look forward to that. That's coming soon. And thank you for having me. Saying a lot of the stuff outside, saying a lot of the stuff out loud kind of helps me, organize my thoughts. So a lot of this stuff is stuff I've never said out loud before.
All the stuff I say out loud comes out as mush. But I'm going to put all of Sebastian's links to Hiadventure and everything like that down in the description. So if you're interested in any of that wonderful content, go ahead and check him out. And thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you. It's much appreciated.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.